So I think this works. Okay, you start. Am I starting or are you starting? So this is part, by the way, this is part of the concept. Shulamit and I had a very special relationship in working, and we decided to put this on stage because it has to do a lot with interrupting each other. But maybe we start with the three guys.
Right, we start with the three guys. But we start with a thank you, of course, to Fatma and Salt that we are so honored and privileged to speak here, and also that you are sitting inside a public artwork, which is really precious to me. I don't know if you know this. This you see on the gray cushions. You see these tree-like structures. It's an artwork by Gülçin Aksoy, who I really admire. And it's part of the family cemetery I love, which is a very interesting book. So just that you're conscious that you're sitting inside the artwork. But we start with the three guys. And the three guys are three Geminite Talmud scholars in Jerusalem. Probably it's an Armenian photographer whose name I don't know. And they're studying the most important book of the rabbinic tradition, which is the Talmud. The Talmud originated 3rd century Palestine to 9th century, mainly was taught in Baghdad. Baghdad was the center for the Jewish world for so many centuries, until 1949 actually. And these three guys are opening the book and they're studying it from all sides. And I just wanted to name 4 characteristics of how in the traditional antique world you would study this very specific text, which is the first thing. It's actually connected to a question which is very pertinent today. Has to do with a kind of homelessness or ubiquitous nomadic existence, with the rabbis and Jews losing Jerusalem in the 1st century under Roman, let's call it, occupation. They gave the Roman Empire Jerusalem and said, give us the house of study. And from that times on until the sort of new colonial Western nation state that we have in Palestine, Israel, they really had the conviction that there should be only one kind of homeland, which is this text. So wherever the text is, there's a kind of home. The text is the home for the rabbinic scholars. And they carried, of course, all over the world, which is sort of why the tradition was everywhere, or the learning or the wisdom was everywhere, where this book is. That's the first thing. So in the 10th century, a very important Baghdadi scholar would say, En umatenu ela kibut toratenu, which means we don't have any kind of homeland except this kind of book. That's the first principle. The second is something that's called chavruta. The guys are learning this text, not quiet. You never study this text quiet. You talk it out loud. That means you're reading it out loud, and the text is so complex, so dense, so many centuries, so opaque in a certain way, and so rudimentary that you actually cannot understand it when you're just reading it. You have to interpret it while reading. So it means you have to sort of write it on while reading. You have to talk about it, because you can only figure out what's written when you actually speak about it. And then you fill in the kind of gaps and
then you change it.
And then
in this moment.
You change it while you study it, and you also interrupt each other, because the most interesting point in what your friend says, and you always study 2 of you. It means we're now a chavruta on stage, performing chavruta. And the chavruta is always 2. And it comes from chaver, means friend, or even beloved. And the text itself is a kind of very sensual thing for the scholars, very, very physical. And when you find something interesting, you actually hook to it and you interrupt your friend. And the interruption is where sort of the tangent goes off, and you get somewhere where you didn't know you were going. So it means the kind of unknown, new thing is the real chidush, the real kind of...
Which is super nice to hear, because this was actually our collaboration like. because we kept teaching each other about a profession we both didn't know about. I mean, we only knew our own profession, yes, but we didn't know the other professions. And while I learned so much about philosophy and how to approach texts and lots of words I never heard before, the same happened to you when I taught you about typography and hierarchies in typography. And this is how from discussing our professions in the first step, right, I think this also created the shape of the book. So this was the first process that also related to how the book looks now.
So this is because you might not know, we did a book together, which is this black book, which is the house of Taswir. And I was so privileged to work with such an amazing artist, designer together, who was not
and
only...
vice versa.
True, but I mean, this is really like, we did so many books for so many important artists. So this was what we were working on together. So there's one copy here to look at afterwards. But this book has in a way to do with this method and with exhibition making, which is sort of the surprising part maybe. The third point, the chavruta, is the interruption point, the tangents and the speaking out loud. The third thing is that the book is also in a way like a table. I mean, the most important book in the tradition, the rabbinic tradition, is 17th century, called the set table. And it's meant like an overflowing table full of delicious food. But the food is this book. You see, so the scholars have a very, very central relationship to the text, and they actually also speak about the interpretations or the readings as ta'am. Ta'am means taste. So the real taste is the taste of the commentaries and the letters and the words and the new things. So we actually translated yes, exactly. We translated the table into a spatial environment of exhibitions, which of course anyone does this. It's very regular. I mean, every exhibition has a table for scholars to discuss, or for art critics, for artists, artist talks, etc. But here it's a very, very strict, like, architectural citation of the book in the way it is used by these three guys. And you see how then, this was an exhibition I did in the Martin Gropius Bau called Taswir. Taswir in the sense of image making, outlining, showing, representing, etc. So this is the Taswir exhibition, this is the Martin Gropius Bau, this is our table. And then I translated the architecture of the book in a way, the way the page looks like, and I will show you now soon, into the schizza of the exhibition.
And this is from the designer's point of view. Can you go back to the sketch? This is something, I don't know how many designers are here, but this is something where you immediately think, wow, this is just super. It looks like someone from the design field had made a sketch about design thinking or something. So and this is, yeah. So this, I was deeply impressed to see this. And I kept this sketch in mind, or your whole kind of sketching, your ideas for the actual design.
And you will understand the sketch better when you see this page. This is a sample page from the book that the three guys are studying from the Talmud. And you will have a central text, which is our table, in a way, that is, in a way, not really legible, that has to be laid out by interpretation. And you have sort of the kind of margins are important commentaries that are kept while writing. It's in a way it's an archive, because you are archiving while you are proscribing or like continue the text into the future. So it's almost like real-time speaking and writing at the same time. So this is a very, very famous commentary from the 11th century from France and Germany, and the other is a famous commentary of the grandchildren of this commentary. So it's a kind of unfolding which is always going from the scholars who are studying it, from this lively chavruta, from outside in, from the margin to the center. So it's a very the margin is the creative sort of incentive. You always go outside in. You come from the margin. You don't start from the center. Nobody can read what's written in the center without going through the space of the margin. And this is, of course, an architectural principle. And there's one thing which is very bitter kind of thing to realize that obviously this text is a text that has absolutely been occupied by political and ideological literary occupation. We're not only talking about military and colonial occupation in Palestine, which is one thing, but also the kind of claim that a territorial nation state has on this text, and therefore ruining the Jewishness, right, of this text, I think forever, because you can no longer disentangle the cosmopolitan or exilic or diaspora nature of this text from its occupation by the nation state. So that means, in a way, this text is no longer available in its marginality or in its kind of ubiquity or in its diaspora nature, which is why the grandson of the last chief rabbi of Baghdad, who was always considered the Resh Galuta, the head of the Galut, the head of the Jewish diaspora, the grandson went to Palestine and then Amsterdam. From Baghdad is Yosef Tzemach, a famous artist who I would love to show his work in Istanbul. He actually covered the text with black oil and only left the kind of in-betweens, as now they don't look like voids that you can read in, they more look like lines of flight that you actually sort of, that you can only go in between, in a way like Deleuze connects it to the nomadic kind of line of flight.
And this is, so what you hear now from Shulamit is, we go back, is the content, it's the political background, it's all this information you have from the core of the idea of the text and what happened to the text or what happened to the nation or what happened to the religion. But as a designer, I approach it completely different. I just saw it and I just thought, okay, as a type designer, I work with black and white, and what is important is the white and more than the black, right, in one moment of the design process. And then if you're a book designer or a graphic designer, you just see these grids. And then some of you might remember that in design schools, it's a method of teaching that you have to fill, you have to cover the text with colors or with black and white to get an idea of the grid. Mm-hmm. So this is how I work, and this is where I just got fascinated by the Talmud and its grid. And it's so nice when we talk to each other, we both were talking about the same, but from a completely different approach and with completely different background. And this is
very important to me that I do not, and I really want to stress it, come in any way from a religious perspective. It's not between us, but also for the audience, because it's always sort of mistaken to be concerned with traditional religion. It's really concerned with, I call it a kind of epistemic architecture, how to think from outside in, or how to think in between the signs or the letters, or how to think from the margin, and how to sort of think from the future to past, because you do not, how to think from the tangent that you provide, that you actually interrupt. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm interested in, and it happened to be connected to the rabbinic tradition, because the rabbinic tradition insisted until the 19th century, until this idea of the nation state, that there should not be a political sovereignty of people studying this text ever until the Messiah comes. And when do we know that the Messiah comes? When there's no more war, 3 conditions: no more war, no more poverty, and no more injustice. And the scholars really insisted that there should be no betrayal of these 3 conditions, otherwise this tradition will be dead, unlegible, illegible, or no longer available. So this is sort of what interested me, the kind of withdrawal of tradition past the surpassing disaster. This is a term coined by Jalal Tawfiq from Beirut. It's a very important work for me. He's an architect, filmmaker, writer from Beirut. And this withdrawal, which is immaterial withdrawal, it's not that you don't have the Talmud, but you don't have this kind of thinking, going about it, sort of moving very physically inside the
and this is actually just what I just wanted to say is, as a graphic designer, I work in 2D, so I'm interested in the black and white, and in just in the 2D. But you're thoughts and all the thinking is 3D. And this is where it's very difficult to come together in a design.
Right,
this is just what I wanted to say.
Interesting. No, this was the exhibition I curated for Martin Gruppesbau, where I put
in 3D.
In 3D, yes. You see now it's almost Mondrian-like, but it is the Talmud. It is the Talmud of the Tractate of Psachim. And next to Gaza Walls is a work by a very important Palestinian artist called Taswir. So this sort of shows the judgment on my part of the non-availability of this kind of tradition, which is why I got interested in a text like this, which suffers, it's a hadith of 13th century. You see the enormous livelihood of the margin going in between the letters, and there are multiple times and multiple places overlapping in the margin. And obviously we know, I don't have to explain in this here, is that this is occupied just the same way as the Talmud is. So this is a visually or like architecturally, I would say. It's almost, for me, it became an architectural design, how to build an exhibition. And of course it is the same way, it has withdrawn the same way, or it's no longer available in the same way as the ancient Talmudic text, which was why I got interested in the Aby Warburg project, the Mnemosyne Atlas of the 1920s, famous art historian, Jewish art historian, Hamburg, 1920s, who actually switched images for letters in a way. He built like themes in images connecting European modernity, the Renaissance, and the antiquity, in providing clusters of themes that he would rearrange every evening. And he would build a library of 80,000 books in the 1924-28, trying to connect Europe and extra-European sources and contemporary and ancient objects.
And I see this concept and this idea of Aby Warburg's movable elements and images. I consider this as being one of the first ideas or concepts what we now know as World Wide Web. Mm-hmm. So I think the idea of linking images, linking ideas, linking times, mm-hmm. and being able to change them and relink very early and without any electronics or digital stuff.
I mean, really, this was like they had themes like melancholia or victory or joy or eros or thanatos, whatever it was, and they created tablets with real real posted images for each theme, and then they would rearrange them according to their new discussions on them. So in the way they moved it in a way like very similar than the margins in these ancient texts. And this is something I discovered by chance, because if these ancient texts are in a way or radically no longer available to us, immaterially available to us, then this is a fantastic example I came about by chance by Max Ernst. It's called L'exercice illégal de l'astronomie, L'exercice illégal de l'astronomie, and it was a collaboration with a mathematician by the name of Tempel, of all names, and the subject matter was spiral clouds and the mathematical problems related to these spiral clouds, and they wanted to expose the kind of infinity or the differentiation and the ambiguity of the understanding the phenomena by writing a commentary. And Max Ernst said, for this kind of phenomenon of the spiral cloud, we need a script that is illegible. So he actually invented an illegible script to discuss the spiral clouds of the mathematician Tempel, and they're put like the text in the middle. They become the new text. So the text now is not a text, or maybe it is a text, and the commentary is this kind of new script that Max Ernst invented for it.
And I just love it, because I think this is so, when you look at this at the first time and you don't know that it's illegible, you would consider like, oh wow, this looks like a script I just don't know, especially from the back, and then you look closer and you just get this idea of, yeah, it's a little Star Wars like. Maybe it's not a script, right. But first you try to read it, and first you try to decode it, and then you see that the legible letters are taken from, obviously it's Fortura or something, so it's a grotesque typeface from the 20s. So keep this in mind. I will show later some images where it reappears. And also the layout of the page for me was very inspiring.
So we go back to, you can see the sort of the kind of phenomenological like analogy, and this is where we started our formal discussions when we started to do the book in terms of the book as the object. It's an object, of course. It's
of course, it's an object. No? Yeah. So I take over with the layout now, because I like to say that. So me as a graphic designer, and not a philosopher, even I am taught a little bit in talking to artists and people with a lot of ideas. So when I heard of Shulamit first, I just someone introduced each other, and we didn't know each other. And so I just heard about the project, and I got fascinated. And I just thought, wow, it's something 3D and exhibition, and you have to enter this and margins. And I just thought, wow, this sounds like a challenge, but I want to know more. And then, And then I met Shulamit, and then I didn't understand any word of what you said. And then I asked again, and you repeated, and I said, okay, so maybe I get an idea now. And then I understood more and more and more, and I was fascinated too. And so this is my job as a designer, is that the people who approach me, my clients, mostly, or hopefully, this is the best case if they are not from the design field, and they need someone to translate their ideas into something that someone else is able to decode or understand and read. So this was actually my job in our constellation. Then we became friends. So first my job was to translate your ideas, and your briefing was that you talked about your exhibition, you talked about all these universes of 3D, brainy.
Yes, the exhibition was the
worlds.
Object of the
exactly,
book.
Exactly, and that you wanted to have an object. Right. And what was very, very helpful, and one of the nicest briefings ever, was that you said you want that every page is accessible whenever you want. So there is no chronology.
Mm.
And
it's true. I wanted every single double page to be the beginning of the book. This was the condition. We did the book in such a way that you can enter the book at any single double page wherever you open it.
And every spread is a world on its own, but of course it's part of the main world, right. So the big object. And so this meant that with all these pages there was we had to split the text into pieces, otherwise the whole concept wouldn't have worked out. So my inspiration from it was that, of course, I had the Talmud, I had the Arabic world, I had the philosophy, I had the 20s from Aby Warburg and everybody. So it was between modernism and classic, from just the approach for something visual. And I got fascinated by the Talmud setting and the Talmud layout. So this is actually how I'm working when I'm doing a grid for a book, and this is the actual grid of the house of Taswir, and it's just to explain to everybody who's not a designer how you approach it. First, you have to know about the amount of text. Second is who's going to read it. So are these people who are used to read in small sizes, or are they more comfortable with large sizes of text? Then, of course, the format. The format is very important. So if you have someone who does landscape photographs, you, of course, have a landscape format. If you have someone who does mountains, you have a portrait size format. And if you have someone who wants an object and wants a house as a book, then of course the idea of the square, especially when you remember the three guys and you want to study it from all four corners, square makes sense. But a square for a designer is not a square like you know, so we have to think about optical illusions, and the square for me is, in this case, it's 22 by 24 centimeters, and not 22 by 22 because optical illusion. So you have to work against optical illusions. So this is the format, and then you have to think about, okay, I have this amount of text, I have that and that many pages. The pages are related to the budget, and they are related to the weight of the book, because there is an end to have a book, and the binding and everything. And so when you have these components, you have to think about, okay, a text is best readable when the lines have a length of 60 to 80 characters per line. And this is the best way of reading. But I got your carte blanche because you said it's not a novel, it's not something you're reading in bed with bad light, it's something you study. It's something you can approach all the time, and you read it in bits and pieces.
True.
So this is where I just thought, okay, we can have moments where it's not that easy to read the text, and when you can put some effort in it. So I had these 4 columns because I knew there were a lot of footnotes, there was a lot of body text, and then we are coming back to the table. We don't have an image yet, no, but the table is what Shulamit explained, and I just thought, okay, the table, I want to have the table in the book, and now we are getting into 3D, where I said, okay, the table is getting into the middle of the book, because we are approaching from the margins.
Because yesterday I learned this for the first time. I mean, you created the book, I celebrated the book, of course, the way you did it, but I didn't know until yesterday that you actually thought of the center of the page as the table. In the way that I'm thinking of the table, that's really beautiful. So every page has the table in a way.
And then this is what I really love. When this is for me the most successful moment is when I have an approach in my mind and how I work, and it does work, and people are happy and they understand it, but they don't know why. So I don't want to be too obvious, because this would be distracting from the text. And so this is the table. So we have the 4 columns to be flexible, and then we have I use the same grid for there are some pages where you have the atlas where we use the images. For technical reasons, we put all the images in one part of the book because of the printing with color. Everything else is printed in black and white, but we had 3 print sheets, I think, in color. So this is why they are in one part. So here you can see how the actual spreads are working. And when you have a look to the headline, you see the headline is set in Superla. Superla is an interpretation of Futura by Karl-Heinz Lange, but it's much better readable than Futura.
I just, by chance, see the headline. Is it not Black Fire and White Fire?
Yeah.
Because you talked about black and white.
Yeah.
And it's just a comment because it's a saying in the 3rd century that the text actually that we are concerned with, the infinite text, the text that is worth to study not only for one life or one generation, but for all the future to come, to actually fix the universe. This text is, this is the scholars say, of the 3rd century, not what's printed black on white, but it's of course the whiteness between the letters. So the ancient scholars considered the white between the letters to be the written text, whereas the letters are the commentary. So you have that kind of black and white that you talked about. And it's a real saying, it's an ancient saying, black fire and white fire. So the white fire is the real text, which is
my idea about letters. Yeah. So what else you see here is that we have sometimes left-bound text and sometimes it's right-bound. And so the idea was, since your sources, your original sources for a lot of your studies are in Hebrew or in Arabic, I wanted to have this visible from the first glance, that you just get this impression. And so Arabic and Hebrew is written from right to left and not vice versa, like Latin. And I just wanted to have this like a little greeting from these scripts that the text is sometimes set in from right to left, but of course not, otherwise you couldn't read it. So I just made it with left and right bound, and it's changing, it's depending on how long the text is. You also see, and I want you to talk about the Messiah now, because I did something I normally ban from my students. So for my students, it's banned to use all four corners in the layout. And this is, except here in the headline, this is part of the concept I did here. I used all the four corners to put information and to keep the grid and mark these 4 points. But normally in design, it kills the dynamics. And this is why I banned this in the first place for the beginners, because it's very difficult to understand dynamics. When you understand dynamics, you're free to do whatever you want. And then, but you have to get the dynamics then somewhere else. So part of the concept are the 4 corners.
I learned it from you because I forgot, of course. And when I say, I mean, of course we know that in the 20th century, Walter Benjamin and Kafka and so many have been concerned by the postponement of the Messianic days to come. So when I say the Messianic days, I don't mean, again, a religious tradition. I mean a kind of concept of futurity that inspires the past. The futurity is this kind of abolishment of war, poverty, and injustice. This is what we're talking about, and nothing else, actually. And this is also the only thing that has ever been considered in the ancient times as the whole ta'am, the whole sense to study in the first place. Why would this be an infinite text? Because it's worth giving your life to it, and the life of all generations, until these 3 conditions are fulfilled. And when you talked about the 4 corners, that you forbid your students or the beginners to use them, I of course was reminded of, I think it's even Walter Benjamin and others, of course, that you actually, in that future time to come, that you actually will bring this kind of justice, or the humankind of the future will gather, the Messiah will gather all 4 people from all 4 corners of the world to come together and then create a kind of human society that is other than the one we know. So this is, okay, the 4 corners are a very, very important concept in that it means the world. I mean, from all 4 corners of the world, people will be gathered to come to create this sort of alternative human society that we all
Yeah, and I just love when I tell my students not to do this. I quote a very German. I don't know if you have this here in Turkey too. We have the Poesie album, which is where children, mostly 10-year-old, 11-year-old children, they have these little books and they give it to their friends, and the friends have to write something. And there's this very famous sentence, so if you don't have any idea what to write, everybody writes, in allen 4 Ecken soll Liebe drin stecken, which means in all 4 corners must be love. And this is the quote I tell my students when I say don't do this, and then they're embarrassed because they feel like, oh, I'm 11. I was working with an assistant, Hannes Echter. You will see him on a picture later. And this is when Hannes was sitting there and we were discussing the layout. I kept repeating myself, in allen 4 Ecken soll Liebe drin stecken. So this was the love part. Yeah. Okay, talking about 4 corners. We have more 4 corners here. These are some levels of the design, or some layers of the design. So we start with something fixed. Fixed is the image and fixed is the text until a certain point, until I grabbed the manuscript from Shulamit and I forbid her to change any more things after quite a while, because Shulamit keeps permanently thinking and is developing ideas. So this was the moment when I grabbed it and said, "Give it away. I take it. Go away and give it to me."
You came to the door. You rang the bell. You came. I was in the middle of, and she was like taking it in the middle of the word, and said, "That's it, done." And then you disappeared. And then I had so many things I forgot.
You were really like, yo.
So all these many things, and then you were gracious with me, and you gave me.
You had one last chance.
And so Verena gave me, like, how do you call these paper, like.
You got printouts and tracing paper.
So tracing paper, like translucent paper, and the ready sheets. And then you allowed me the things that were driving me crazy that they should be in the book. Like, you allowed me to write in the transparent sheet, like on the book, things that I had forgotten. So these are.
And this is printed. So we scanned them, and then it's printed. To the same time, it's also printed in, but it's not in 100% black. It's just in 80%.
Because I thought, how could I forget William Burroughs in the kind of the splintered word and the kind of performances of cut-ups, and how could I forget the cut-ups of William Burroughs in this context? So this is one of the things, and also of course it is the margin that is unstoppable. It's a kind of
unstoppable
Shulamit. No, it's an unstoppable margin that will always outgrow. It's a kind of principle of uncontrollable growth.
Uncontrollable.
Anyhow.
No, wait. And we have one more layer, and the next layer or next level, and this is what stays flexible, is the QR code, because the QR code is also part of the concept. And I love that it looks like Kufi a little bit, and you also have the four corners concept in the QR code, and the QR code leads to Shulamit's website of the Taswir Atlas, and this is something where you can get an audio file or a video, and this is something you can change permanently if you want to, because digital new media, thank God, is changeable.
But you see, in a way, we didn't talk about the house yet, because the house is a very interesting thing to talk about. But here we were looking for the ways in which the book could sort of like move into a spatial context. That this is a tunnel in a way to a spatial presentation, a video or whatever it is. So we try to create escape ways or lines of flight inside the book, for the book to escape its own structure or to escape its own limits. Like that, this was one way.
Yeah, I thought once about augmented reality, but I'm super happy that I didn't mention this to you, because this I think we wouldn't have printed anything yet if we would have started this. So I'm very happy that I got quoted by Shulamit in the last minute.
One second. This is important because this is the passage talking about Beirut, actually, and Tony Shakar in Beirut with his cityscape walks, and he actually walks inside the ruins of Beirut, like I thought the scholars are moving inside the ancient text. So this layer of the city, of the ancient city, and the text, and the psyche, of course. Like, you remember that Freud compared the psyche to the ancient Rome, and the way that these Beirut theoreticians, which I learned so much from them, talk about the city is very similar to this kind of moving in between the ancient splinters of things. So I thought this to be very important here. So this is how to read a city from its broken letter bodies, in parentheses vanishing, obviously, because there's so much violence there. And then I saw your book, because Verena is not only a typographer, she's also an author of her own book, and she's also an inventor and creator of her own typography. Typefaces. Typefaces?
Yeah.
Okay.
Typography is the big thing.
Okay. Typefaces, I have no idea. And it's called Carbid. Carbid is not only your own typeface, but it's also letters vanishing from the city of Berlin. No? Is it not true?
It is, but this is another universe, okay. And we stay in our new universe. So in our universe, these are just for the designers. So here you see the super in text. I use this for quotes. There is Abril text, Abril text by José Escayone and Veronica Burian, and it's one of my favorite typefaces to work with, to do books with. It's actually meant for magazines and for newspaper print, and it's very classic. And so this is what I just mentioned in the beginning. So we have a lot of classical ideas and classic moments, and this is why I just wanted to have a very legible, beautiful classic typeface. But I mixed it with a very modern. I mean, this the Futura was from the modernism times, and but in a better readable way by Karl-Heinz Lange. So this is how I do mix typefaces. And if you work with typefaces, you know that especially when they are not from the same foundry or not from the same designer, they appear to be in different sizes. And when you choose two typefaces to work with, they should be related in proportions, if needed. If you want to do something else with this, they don't need to. In this case, I wanted to have them having the same proportions. And Superla and Abril are having the same proportions in concern of ascenders and descenders. But Abril is slightly larger, just from the software, just from the digital background. So Abril I used in 9.6 and Superla in 10 points, but they appear to have the same size. And then we have this here. This is where I again got a carte blanche by Shulamit, because Shulamit was very fascinated about this idea how Hannes and I reacted on your texts and everything. And we just picked out some of your footnotes, some of your millions of footnotes, and we just thought, yeah, but this is like a text on its own, and it's important. This can't be a footnote. So we just decided this footnote is more important than that footnote, and we made it larger.
It's true. You created a second text,
yeah.
And it's brilliant because I didn't think of it. I mean, you created in a way two parallel running narratives from the footnotes, and you decided, and you called them also then important and unimportant footnotes, which I really liked. I mean, I came. It's not my doing. So they became like a second. You will see it afterwards if you're interested. They became like a second narrative.
And even worse, we just not just said, yeah, this is important, this is not important. If we needed space, we just made it small. And we just thought there's too much white space. We want to have more black or more gray. We just made it larger.
Right. Yeah,
so this is how the text was also moving and becoming important from just very, very, like I say, hair and makeup, just to be pretty. So these are just examples about how the layout actually works with the 4 columns. Sometimes I used, especially for the small footnotes and for the legibility, it's very good to have only 1 column. But then for the body text, I used the space of 3 columns, or sometimes, well, I'm actually never 4. But so not to have 2 long lines. And then a nice feature are the empty spaces.
Right. There's just because this is all full of contemporary artists. The whole book is full of contemporary artists, and the one who's performing here in the Martin Gropiusbau, you see, is Taswir with a performance called Voyage Impossible, and he was doing the opening to 4 hours, shuffling the sand from one side to the other to show the futility of his exilic situation in Paris, not being able to come back to Gaza, to his own, to his family. So it's just that when you see the book, it's full of artistic performers. So this is basically what you think of when you open the book, and yes.
And sometimes I didn't use any image, and these are these voids we were talking about, to just have space for imagination or space to just breathe, just text needs air to breathe. And as you see here, especially here, I mean the 4 corners concept, it's not just for the spread, it's for every single page. And if one corner is not filled, it's a surprise moment, so suddenly the empty space becomes exciting.
Mm-hmm, right. And of course the whole idea of emptiness is very important. It's the spatial concept also. And there are of course voids that are hermetic, and like in the Jewish Museum you mentioned in Berlin, they become a traumatic, hermetically closed space, and we basically mainly treated it like the lines of flight inside these
exactly
texts, as a kind of echo of things not yet written, the things yet to come. Should I?
Yeah.
And there we are back at the Atlas, the Mnemosyne project of the image atlas of Warburg, where he was shuffling and reshuffling his archive. And archive in the sense that every single object will create its own environment to be studied and pursued. So you can see this. Just this is.
Yeah, this is. I think it's super important to also show this process. So we had our Aby Warburg atlas on our table in our studio, and so you can see Hannes, and I think Shulamit, you saw it to the first time. You saw. I mean, you knew the concept, and I showed you some examples. But this is actually where we had the first time you saw your text filled into the book as following the concept.
I was absolutely amazed. I came and I saw this and thought, wow, this was, the whole book was ready. It was like spread out on the table. And this was
and floor and everywhere.
Right, everywhere. So this is Hannes Echter. He really did an amazing job. Right.
Yeah, and then you were allowed to shuffle your stuff around, because we were of course asking, are you sure you want to have it here? Mm-hmm. Oh, and repeating stuff is also super important, and you will see that some images are appearing twice or even triple.
Right. The whole idea of a non-linear way of narrating, which we all know today, but I connected this non-linearity and the simultaneity of the diachronic timelines to ancient models. So this is basically what it makes it different maybe from all these contemporary like scenes that we know that everyone is creating today, schemes that are connecting contemporary and ancient and sort of, but this is a researched visually researched methodology for exactly this kind of contemporaneity of what is ancient. So yes.
So this is just leading over to the idea of the archive, because one of my favorite parts of the book to design or to actually to typeset is the index, and I think this is something that some people are just forgetting about, how important the index is to be as pretty as the rest of the book or as legible and carefully designed. So this is just one snapshot from the book, but there's quite a large index because it is an archive. And so if you have a look to the book, it would be nice if you could check the index also, because this was, I think it took most of the time actually to make the index like the index is now.
Okay, now I think we have a problem of time, because the more interesting
I give
things,
over to you.
No. In principle, the hours is over, but we have such interesting things are coming, because now we would talk about the way the book is translating its own format back into space, to how it becomes an exhibition again. Right? This was a brilliant way of you and Hannes to speak about, to show, to represent censorship. There was a really annoying and interesting story behind this Taswir exhibition with 65 artists from mainly like 23 countries engaging classical object of 20 famous collections of so-called Islamic art inside the Martin Gropius book. This was the Taswir exhibition. And there was a very annoying story about
I think the short story is actually that it was the German authorities who didn't dare to show certain things and never took position and never answered, and then suddenly decided that they were not brave enough to show something what had no reason to be brave at all, because it was so totally innocent.
There's so much behind this. There was a work by Taswir in Gaza, which I got out only by the help, after 3 futile attempts, with the help of the German ambassador going to Gaza with his suitcase to take it with the immunity of the diplomat. And I showed this work in 3 large walls, like the Gaza walls and the martyrs. And then there was a text written for the catalogue by a friend of mine from Ramallah, from Birzeit University, and it was so obvious what he wrote. He wrote about the colonial occupation of Palestine, knowing no equal in the history of colonialism, which sort of is true. I mean, if we think about it.
Fact.
And it was so sensitive for the Germans, for the foreign ministry especially, so that there was an attempt to have me censor this paragraph, and I didn't. So it was 2 months before the opening, and I said that either you print it or I will be gone with all the artists. I'm sorry. I really went all in with it, and then they did a little footnote saying that this doesn't convey the idea or the position of the organizers. And what happened afterwards is that the museum was writing a letter, a kind of history lesson to this Palestinian scholar, who was the head of the department for Arab modernity in Birzeit, and they were writing a letter actually teaching him a lesson in Zionism, which was absolutely absurd, and connecting Berlin and the topography of terror to the Shoah, obviously, and the state of Israel. And the scholar got so absolutely annoyed, we understand, that he wrote an amazing letter back about the right of the indigena, of the kind of non-European, to think, and about can the subaltern speak? Can the subaltern use Deleuze and Foucault, etc., in his presentation of the text that was to be censored? And this letter I kept from the press because my exhibition was a very cosmopolitan narrative of the connectivity of objects and not of the Middle Eastern conflict. So I was keeping this whole thing, which was so highly nervously debated, out of the public discourse, and also this letter, which I found absolutely brilliant. And then in this book, because we talked about empty spaces, and empty spaces can be inspiring, but they can also be full of violence and hiding someone's face.
Hurry up a little bit.
Yes, I hurry up. So that means when we came to the emptiness of the space, the invitation, never mind. So the letter of the scholar I wanted in the book. So there's a section saying letter from a Palestinian scholar and letter to a Palestinian scholar, because I wanted the letter of the museum's people in that book. And then the museum's people said, we don't want it to be printed, but we already had set it up. So it means in that case, I found that really amazing what Hannes and Verena did.
We didn't take it out, we left it where it was. And if you want to hide something, I can just suggest make it big, make it really large, and no one sees it. And if you want to make something really visible, try to hide it, and everybody immediately jumps on the small bits and tries to see it. So this was the idea, to not even just use the black marker, but just really X it out, because people really, everybody tries to read what's behind.
It's a kind of inverse censorship, which makes it interesting, because it's the letter of the organizers and not of the scholars. So sort of it's interesting inverse. So what we don't have time for is actually the way I translated the book again in Çanakkale Biennial, the fourth Çanakkale Biennial. I was invited by Beral Madra, who I really admire. She's the first founding curator of the first and second Istanbul Biennial. There's no need probably to introduce her to this audience. 5 national pavilions for the Venice Biennial, etc. So she invited me to curate the Mahal art space in Çanakkale, and I was actually very much into the subject of disappearing traditions and sort of the withdrawal of tradition in the face of sort of the illegibility that it gained because of the withdrawal of the languages. In this case, Çanakkale had 1915 40 quarters. Jerusalem has 40 quarters, 40 languages, spoken 1915 in all liveliness. And this halal space is in the middle of the Jewish quarter, and it has been an old storage and beautiful building. So I projected in the form of the atlas, or in the form of this book, I sort of translated the format of the ancient book into an atlas of poetry in 11 languages that are no longer available to the public, although they have been alive in 1915. So I wanted to show the withdrawal of the language in the face of the visitor, because I presented them without translation in Russian, in German, in Hebrew, in Arabic, in Farsi, in Georgian, in Greek, of course, in Armenian, of course, in Kurdish, of course, etc., etc. So this was my Atlas of Poetry in 11 languages, and of course you can see that it's sort of extrapolating in a way the architecture of the book. So the book becomes a space again, backwards, and you see that the space of my exhibition in Gropius, which is the same idea that every room had only just one quotation, and then the ancient, the contemporary sort of were clouding around it. So this is the way Verena actually translated the architecture again back into the book. This is an architectural sketch. This is the exhibition in quotations. And you see that sort of I lined up the narrative at the, sort of I inverted the commentary and the narrative. So I put the commentary in the middle of the Gropius ball and put the narrative on the 18 rooms in the margin. You can see it. So I just sort of took the liveliness of the margin and just inverted it in terms of the architecture of the museum. You can see that here. You can see that here even better. So my actual narrative, which is the center of the text, the tish, so to speak, the table, becomes the narrative of the exhibition. In the middle was my chavulta, my kind of margin. The margin looked like this, as you've seen before. Or it could have looked like this, when there was an orchestra. Like everything was a citation in the exhibition. If there was an orchestra doing something, it was a commissioned piece of one of the poetry connected to one of the works in the exhibition. So it's all about the kind of connectivity that objects have that actually are much beyond, and this is very important, the kind of divides we know in terms of nationalities, essentialisms, racisms, ethnicities, etc. So it's beyond dialogue, because dialogue is always a combat zone. There's no dialogue that is not a combat zone, because there are never two, or like the essentialisms are, we have so many of them. Even when you say, I don't know, the those, or if these are, whoever you put in as a group, is the objects can really sort of lean and touch in ways that are way beyond these kind of essentialisms that we are used to so much in the language, especially in the like feuilleton kind of language. And this is something that, of course, Warburg knew. And what I'm doing now, actually, and I see Sinan here, who is a colleague of mine in this project. And what I'm doing now is sort of explore really the idea of this atlas, this kind of connectivity of objects in terms of an archive, but a very specific archive, namely the archive of Beran Magara, who's, as I said, the curator of the first and second Istanbul Biennial. Especially this year, the biennial is again happening. And these are actually her exhibitions, which we turn into clouds of themes, thematic clouds, that give you a certain atlas or topography that behaves in a way. You can see here, for example, what she did was outstanding in 86, 87, that she actually used the Hagia Irena, the ancient church, and put in contemporary works of German artists like Arnold Reiner and others. So you can make it up. It's like one of the little images there. When you click on it, it will move from the margin into the center, you see? You will have a table in that kind of topography, which is a digital space that you step in. It's like a mahal, but digital. So this is when you call an object into the center, and then when you go into it, you can open the book again. So we converted the book that you know with the margins into a kind of digitally produced archive that you can enter as a space, as a kind of black box, or as an exhibition space. So you can always move the margin to the center. So if I go here to the text of Effie Strusa, who was an important Greek curator who just passed, she was a member of ICA, the close colleague of Belmada, you can call that up and that text will move into the center, and then you will have new margins. So this kind of light, the infinity of the archive, how do you rank, how do you call this post, not post-archive, beyond, after the archive? In a way, I mean, this is an archive that is really after the archive, because it is sort of, as I said, it's in real time, writing and listening and thinking and writing sort of while you go along. So it becomes a kind of archive that you never catch its own tail in a way, right? So if we would show this in public, it should be, again, a table of scholars discussing it. So while you speak, it would be sort of appearing in this thing. So it's like popping up while doing. So this is basically, yeah, this is a quotation I like. It's questioning the great authority of geography, which is, of course, what this archive does and what the book does. So
and this is your current work.
This is
what you're working on right now.
This is what the Cultural Academy Taralia is allowing me to do for months already now. Yeah, exactly working out this kind of, yeah, questioning the great authority of geography. So basically,
yeah,
just rushed it through.
Yeah, we rushed through, and just from the designer again. So we put the cover to the back of our presentation, because this is how I work. I always design the cover after I designed the inner part of the book, because then I finally have the feeling about how I want to present the book, or the client wants to present the book. And what I really liked is that Shulamit told me she doesn't want to have this barrier between the reader and the book itself, and even before approaching the book. So what I did on the cover was that I used exactly the same grid like inside, and I was working with the same principle for the cover. So this is the front cover, and this is the back cover.
And the front cover has the table. Actually, this is the table.
This is your table.
This is so funny, because this is a snapshot I just took, like, of my own table. So, and it has a lot of things on dream texts in it, because we didn't touch it even. The whole way Freud describes the way the dream work works, like with the displacement and recurrence and the kind of sort of like the return of the repressed, is very much the same architectural drive than the things we have discussed. It's the same architecture, and that is, yeah, where you have here dream texts and other stuff. So yes, thank you.
Thank you.